there's even a correlation between students that play sports that semester and how good their grades are that semester compared to the next semesters. I've seen stark contrast. One of my best football players, I had to keep him in in sports all year solely because last year he didn't do that and his grades were like a sliding scale of D's to A's to D's. I think sports, band, the arts, those those things for some reason those kids just seem to connect or want to, or maybe it's the lessons they've learned from those things, those extracurriculars that kind of have learned those life skills earlier than some of the other kids.
Coach McCray, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing good. So before we get to your current role as the head coach and obviously a teacher at WC Friday as well, let's start with you. What did sports look like for you as a kid?
Growing up, I actually started out playing hockey when I was about 5 or 6, and then t-ball, soccer, and then going into middle school, I got into football and hockey as my two main sports, and then in high school, mostly football and hockey.
You mentioned hockey. Where are you from?
Grew up in outside of Raleigh. It
Okay.
was a small town back then called Holly Springs. Now it's booming. And my mom, she and my dad, they both got me into hockey. My mom's from Canada, and growing up in Raleigh around 2006, 2007, Hurricanes were winning the Stanley Cup, so
Yeah.
everybody wanted to play hockey.
Yeah. Well, that's funny. Well, because you mentioned, I was like, there's no way he's from around the Gastonia area if he's digging hockey. Because I'm from New York and I love hockey, but it's very rarely do you find people from North Carolina that grew up playing it at some point.
Oh yeah, yeah. It was my first true love of a sport. I'll say that.
So sticking with that, because you mentioned that you played a bunch of sports when you were younger. How do you feel about kids now sticking to like one sport year round? Or are you a guy that thinks like the more you play, the better it is for you?
I think, especially in the middle school level, I think kids should play every single sport possible. Um, I think some of our best players this year played 4 or 5 sports. They started with football, then they wrestled, then they played soccer, then they did track, or they played baseball, or they did basketball. Those kids that stood out in football or stood out in basketball or stood out in one sport generally stood out in them all. So I think from a young age, every kid should try to play as many sports as possible. I tell all my kids, do something other than just football.
Is there a coach, a specific coach, or even maybe a mentor or an adult that when you were younger playing sports is like the reason why you stuck with sports?
Yeah, my dad, um, he coached me a lot as a kid. He was just really hard on me. He spent 31 years in the Army and retired when I went to college. And he was kind of a driving force. He was never too hard on me that made me feel like I didn't want to play sports. But he also was like, if you have a goal and you want to obtain that, this is what we have to do to kind of get there.
So what was your goal when you were younger? Like, as far as, did you think that you were going to have a career at something sports related, or or was just sports like a way to get by in your youth?
I think everybody has a dream to play sports.
Oh
I
yeah.
know when I was little, playing hockey, playing football in middle school, I thought I was going to be something special. Um, does that happen? No. I mean, your body wears down. I didn't grow much. I mean, I stand at 5'9", so not a not a lot of athletes standing around at 5'9", 200 pounds in high school. So uh, I kind of saw the writing on the wall once I got into high school and later into high school. Definitely was just like, I'm gonna have to go a different route if I want to stay in the game.
So at what point? So you mentioned going a different route. At what point do you decide that you want to become a teacher?
That's actually a really funny story. So I went to Gardner Webb University right down the road. That's how I got into this area, over in Shelby, Boiling
Yep.
Springs. Um, I was a sport management business major. Um, got connected with the football team. Coach McCray was there at the time. That was my sophomore year. Same last name, no relation. He had me get started in the equipment management. Helping with the gear and stuff. Then Trey Lamb came down the road. During his first year, I stayed down there with the equipment and then worked really hard, and he allowed me to stay on as a GA and help with the running backs position. And I left Gardner Webb after I graduated, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I went into the business world and for a couple years and was kind of lost and just kind of felt the draw to really change kids' lives because I felt like I mentioned my dad, but a lot of my coaches, especially my middle school and early high school JV coaches, like they really changed my life for the better, and I kind of wanted to do the same for kids.
So let's go back to the Gardner Webb thing. So you mentioned being an
Mhm.
equipment manager. So I'm a fourth grade teacher. I always stress the importance of like roles to kids, like in my class. Like it's very important. Like just because it may sound like a simple role to you, or it may be a role that you've never heard of, right? It
Mhm.
still plays like a major part in the day to day, and then obviously when game time happens. So talk about your role as the when you were working with the equipment and being an equipment manager. How do you feel like you impacted obviously the teams or the sports or whatever you were involved with? And then what's your message to kids that like you don't have to be the quarterback or the point guard on a basketball team. Like there's other roles.
Yeah, that was I'll say this and then I'll go into that. That was a big thing this year with a lot of our kids is finding a role with the basketball team because I'm the assistant coach on the boys and girls basketball team and the football team. It was big about, not everybody's going to be the superstar. Not everybody's going to start. Middle school sports are really geared towards eighth graders, and as seventh and sixth graders, it's hard to play. But that was a big thing for us this year. Well, honestly, a theme we talked about a lot. But going back to Gardner Webb, uh, it was, in my opinion, I feel like I did a lot there. Uh, I wasn't paid. I probably worked 60, 70 hours, but you do it because you love it. Um, you get out there before every single football practice, an hour, 2 hours before, set up all the equipment, make sure you meet with the coaches, make sure the equipment's where it needs to go, make sure they have the right equipment for their drills. Um, when I got in a little bit more and had a better lay of the land, kind of helping the other students who did it with me, getting them to go. And then on game day, I mean, now I watch a football game and I can't look at people's equipment and not think, oh, that back plate's out of his jersey. Like or a helmet strap is missing there, or something, just like, oh, there's a glove on the field, like all the little things that you just notice as an equipment manager. Like I'd run on the field and like during water breaks and stuff and be like, let me fix this, or a screw or a bolt got knocked out of a helmet, like just little things. I think everybody from the janitor to the head football coach, they make a difference in a college organization, especially.
So do you find yourself now, like you mentioned, that was a big deal with your team this year, is like trying to find roles. Like, do you find yourself like bringing up that story that like you were an equipment manager for like a college football team? Like, is that like, do you present that, or do you present like experiences that you have?
Yeah, I try to present experiences that I have. I mean, in middle school, I felt like and I tell my kids this all the time, I felt like I was like one of the best players on the football team. And then you go to high school and it's now everybody's the best football player
Yep.
from their area, because my high school in Holly Springs, we pulled from 3 4 big middle schools, 800 900 kids to make a, sorry, that's my dog, to make 4,000 kid school. I mean, my high school was probably almost as big as Gardner Webb student body. So yeah, I do try to um, impart my previous experience onto them, but I also think that at some points they have to be realistic with themselves. Um, and I try to pull them aside. And especially being an assistant coach, it's a lot easier to pull kids aside and just talk with them after practice about, hey, this year you're doing this, but next year you could be doing this, and it's about the work we're putting in here in practice. Because, you might not think you're fighting for playing time this year, but you're fighting for playing time next year, because X, Y, and Z are going to be leaving. Where does that put our team?
How do you take the lessons that you try to teach or coach on the field, or even as the assistant basketball coach for girls and boys? Like, how do you take those lessons and like where do you see them carry over for you in your classroom?
Um, CTE is just it's all about life skills at the end of the day. That's also what drew me to it is some of when I was in school, some of the biggest, life lessons that I learned outside of sports was in those classes. So I think it's about like I tell my kids in my 8th grade class, business and leadership. I tell them all the time, like, you don't have to be great at this or that. You don't have to be like the smartest person in math to succeed. You don't have to be the smartest English language arts person or the smartest science person, but you have to care and you have to want it and you have to want to find success for yourself and whatever success means. And I try to impart on my kids as much as I can during the football season when I'm the head coach that we're going to set a goal for this year. You're going to set your own personal goal. And then you're going to look back and see, what you did and what you didn't do to get to that goal. And I think a lot of students today are, and even in my generation, because I'm a younger guy, it's just all about the here and now. What can I do to do this today? If I go above and beyond in practice, then I should see the results tomorrow. But results aren't really ever going to be a straight up and down.
Yep.
So just really setting goals. I think kids forget to set goals in academics as much as they do in sports. And that's what kind of CTE is all about, is just preparing them for life beyond school.
It's interesting for you to say that about the setting goals because like I set goals with my fourth graders all the time, but I've never, and I love sports, and I've never compared it to like setting goals for sports to setting it for like schoolwork also. So now it's going to be a thing that I'm going to have to use here going forward. So you have an interesting perspective. So I've interviewed PE teachers, I've interviewed math teachers, ELA teachers, but you teach a class in a program that, as you pointed out, real life, real world skills.
Mm-hmm.
So do you notice that, I don't want to say the term easier because I think teaching is hard across the board, but is it easier for you to draw on like the accountability part, like you were just talking about? Like, is it easier for you to explain the accountability? Because like I always have a hard time in class. Like I tell the kids, this is what's going to happen in the real world. Like down the road, you're going to have to work with a team. Like even if you don't like somebody, you got to work with them, or this is going to happen. Like I have all these scenarios, but mine are all like scenarios that could happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yours, you seem to have the benefit of, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so do you find that it's a little, like I said, not easier, but you have a little bit of an upper hand?
Yes, I do. It's funny you say that. I try to bring in as many speakers as I can this year. I didn't bring as many as in last year, but especially because I can harp on it for every single class period, and sometimes I think it reaches some kids and it doesn't reach others, and I want it to reach those other kids. So it is easier, but it's also easier because I can pull, XYZ business owner into my classroom and say, look what he wants out of an employee. Does he want somebody that's doing this or that? No, he wants somebody who's, you know, squared away. So that it does make it easier because I think they care a little bit more, and I think being an encore, they just or an elective class, they kind of see it as less work.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
try to make it fun, so I think it is easier.
Do you find a connection between kids that play sports and how they do academically, whether it's in your class or just in school in general?
Oh, definitely, definitely. Um, there's even a correlation between students that play sports that semester and how good their grades are that semester compared to the next semesters. I've seen stark contrast. One of my best football players, I had to keep him in in sports all year solely because last year he didn't do that and his grades were like a sliding scale of D's to A's to D's. So this year he played a sport every semester, and it was all A's. But it really is. I think sports, band, the arts, those those things for some reason those kids just seem to connect or want to, or maybe it's the lessons they've learned from those things, those extracurriculars that uh I don't know how to put it into words, but they seem to have learned those life skills earlier than some of the other kids.
Yeah, well, and you brought up a good point too. Like I swam in high school, and like I always swim season where I grew up in. So I grew up in Florida, but with this where I grew up, the swim season was in the fall. So
Mhm.
my grades were always good in the fall, and then in the spring my grades would fall off. Like they were good enough so I could still play the following year, but like they
Mhm.
were just never great. And it was like because I had to be like doing something. Like I was continuously focused. But to bring up your thing about you mentioned about like other kids who do sports, they do well academically. To me, I think there's like so much stress with testing and everything else in school that these kids that play sports, whether it's football, basketball, whatever they're at, they're used to already being like in those pressure situations and on the stage that it's like testing is not another big stage. It's just another big stage for them. It's not the big
Mhm.
stage, you know? How do you you kind of mentioned it earlier, but how do you tack teamwork with the kids and like in your class specifically before, let's not even talk about football. Just how do you tack teamwork in your classes?
I've been big this year about, hey, I set the classroom up, and I know a lot of these kids. I've had them for 2 3 years. um I know who does and doesn't hang out with each other, and so I like to put them with people who normally they would never have those experiences, because kids, they separate themselves. Athletes will hang out with athletes. Popular girls won't hang out with non-popular girls. It's all the common cliches. And so I like to, one of the big things I like to do is just mix everybody up so that they have to work with people that they normally wouldn't work with. Um, Another big thing is I incorporate a ton of group projects, because that is such a valuable life skill that, the more that I read and the more that I do research, I feel like my generation, I'm not sure how old you are, but my generation, I'm 26. We started spending a lot of time on the phone. When I got into middle school and high school, everybody had a phone. Social interactions kind of went away. So I feel like these kids now more than ever are missing that teamwork, face to face teamwork. They don't know how to handle their emotions when they want, this person to do that and that person to do that. But now nobody wants to do this. Now we got to come to a compromise, you know. And I think WC Friday is a great place to do that at. I'm going to brag on our school because we're a leadership academy. That's just like a big, super big component. And the eighth grade class that I teach, business and leadership, uh, it really, we have a whole section on team building and how that works, and how how the leader leads, and how you delegate and all that stuff. But it trickles down into all my classes.
So you kind of, so I'm 38, and you led to what was my next question is, which is kind of leads to like motivation, right? So like
Mhm.
these kids need to be motivated. So I see it, I work with 9 and 10-year-olds every day. You do what I consider is like the craziest job in the world. You're in middle school. Like I would never I would never in a million years go to be in middle school. I have a 15-year-old. I went through the middle school years. We're in high school now, so I'm kind of like past it right now.
Mhm.
But how do you motivate these kids? And you can answer this either whether it's from the football field, the basketball court, or even in your classroom, because I don't know how you get through to these 12, 13, and 14-year-olds.
Candy goes a long way. In the classroom, candy goes a long way. They will do anything for candy. They'll also do anything for a job. Some of the most difficult students that I've had just needed some kind of structure. I had a student when I first came in who stood up during a quiz and demanded that he was never going to take another quiz in my classroom. Had a temper tantrum, started stomping around the floor. You know, started bribing him with candy, gave him a job. He would help me clean different things, he would help me do stuff. And I think a lot of it comes down to relationships with kids at that age. A lot of them are trying to explore themselves, trying to figure out what kind of person they are. um, it's a lot of relationships, a lot of candy, definitely in the classroom, and then giving them something to strive for. I use a lot of jobs in my classroom, and we run little elections and stuff.
Oh, nice. Oh, okay. So, all right, you do like a little class economy. Yeah,
Mhm.
I've done that before. So I do the candy thing for sure. So I'm going to ask you a question that's like it could be hard hitting and controversial, and just figure out how you want to answer this. But there's a lot of people who will make the argument about like candy and like not doing candy or not doing rewards like you did.
Mhm.
Not, like I said, I do candy in my classroom. I do classroom economy, right? But I say that the whole world is built on a reward system. I mean, you take a job every week to get paid. Like
Mhm.
the electric company gives you power in order for you to reward them with money. Like the whole world is built on rewards. So where do you stand on that? Like, are you totally like pro, like, yeah, the rewards work?
I'm pro rewards work simply because they do work. And they work to an extent. The kids cannot expect to get candy constantly
Yes.
because they did the bare minimum that day. That won't last. And I'll say from my dad's generation, he just, when I was a kid, he just believed, you go to school, you do your job. That's the bare minimum. And I see people's points with that, but I also think that with each new generation and each style of student, you have to approach it a different way. There's um, no blank canvas. Nobody's the same. I think in elementary school you learn about snowflakes. All snowflakes are different, but that is true. These some kids are not really motivated by candy, and you have to they are motivated by their grade, or they're motivated by social and peer pressure to do X, Y, or Z. So you have to find what makes each student tick, but a lot of them do tick for candy. So, I'm not going to shut that down in my classroom anytime.
No, I agree with you, and I think you said the thing that hit it right on the head is I think there's a misconception that like when people say they're giving out candy,
Hmm.
that they're giving it out for everybody who's doing the bare minimum, and that's not the case. It's like it's being there for like to motivate you along or to reward you for what you did. It's not because you just showed up today. Like you don't get a piece of candy because you came in at 8 o'clock when you could have been at home sleeping. Like, and I think there's a weird like misconception with that. What's the plan or your goal that you hope that kids that are in your class or student athletes they take away from you as like a teacher and as a mentor and a leader?
Have a plan, think about what your future is, and then um, plan out what you want to do. And I know kids aren't gonna write down 10 steps to planning, and they're not going to do this or that. But, what are you doing today, tomorrow, next week, the rest of your life, the next 4 years, if you're leaving, going to high school? What are you going to do if you really do want to be an athlete, or you want to go to college and play a sport, or if you want to be in my seventh grade class, we talk about careers and what they want to do in their future. If you want to be an astronaut, what do you need to do today, tomorrow, next week, in a couple months? What do you need to do to go to UNC or Duke? A lot of these kids don't realize those are hard schools to get into, or even NC State or ECU. Just because such and such went there, it doesn't mean you're going to get in there with, the grades that you have. So I'm big on, number one, planning, and then number two, I preach it a lot, is just being competent. And I think competency has become a bad word. People think of it as being mediocre or mundane, but competency to me, and what I tell my students, is being good. Maybe you're not going above and beyond because you're not a star math student, or you're not a star ELA student, but try your best. That's competency, is trying your best all the time, giving 110% effort. And if you do that day in and day out, you will be a successful student, not in my classroom, not down the hall in math or ELA or PE or in sports, but you also set yourself up for success in 20, 30 years. So I preach both of those.
So you gave your advice is make sure you have a plan. Do you follow your own advice when it comes to football? And what I mean by that is, do you, outside of getting your players prepared for the game, I think middle school you guys play on Wednesdays, but like do you have a plan? Like, do you say, all right, in order for us to beat Stanley Middle School, or for us to beat Holbrook Middle, whoever you're playing, we have to do this. Like, yeah, we have a lot of things on our own end that we need to clean up also, but we have to do this. Like, do you have that plan going into the games? And then if you do, if it doesn't go right for you right away, do you abort it or do you stick with the plan?
All right, so I got a funny story. So this year was my first year ever doing play calling, even being the head football coach. I spent a couple years, spent last year in the school system not coaching, not doing football, and I'd never even called a play. So we get our schedule last summer, and I see the first team on there, Southwest, and I'm like, okay, I don't know Southwest, from any other school, so I'm asking around about them. Apparently something to know if you're going to play in Gaston County is Southwest is that's some top-notch athletes over there. So, we had a plan, as all teams do, and we walk in there, and I think we were down maybe 49 to nothing, 48 to nothing, and I'm on the sideline still calling plays. I hear parents behind me, it's all my worst nightmares. And I'm just like, yeah, we got to change something. We got to So, after that, after going down 64 to nothing, I'd never lost a game that bad in my life. I made a lot of changes. I think Mike Tyson, or a famous boxer, said, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
Yeah.
We got punched in the mouth that day. And then just kind of rewrote everything we were going to do on the season. We went to a power I. So, yeah, I believe completely in being versatile. Sometimes I think it's hard in middle school to be versatile in the middle of a game, just because of how short the games are. Sometimes you see stuff that's working. One time I called a jet sweep play 4 times in a row because the school just couldn't stop the outside run. But sometimes you notice stuff, sometimes you don't. I'm a young coach. This was my first year even calling plays on the offense. But I do believe in, you got to go back to the drawing board, especially if you lose 64 to nothing.
But I think, well, and I also think you brought up a good point though. Like, yeah, you got blown out 64 nothing, but like the way I take it from you is like, you didn't abort the mission like that day. Like, I think there's like this weird conception, like, or misconception with sports that like, oh, we're going to run the game or we're going to run the ball this game. Right. And then they go to hand off the first play and they get stuffed. And then it's
Hmm.
like, all right, well, we got to go to passing now. We got to pass. Like, and to me, it seems like, yeah, you got crushed because you stuck with your game plan, but it's like you gave it enough time to realize, like, all right, it's not working. Like you didn't just jump away right away. Now, hindsight probably would have been better for you to jump away, but you still stuck with it. Let's do a little rapid fire. Favorite sports movie of all time?
Miracle.
Oh, that's a good one. You're like the fourth person to mention that too. All these coaches I interview, like, and my son really loves Miracle too right now. And I'm like, and I love hockey. I like the movie a lot, but it's just funny. Like, there's all these movies, and a lot of guys love Miracle. If you could coach any professional sports team right now, what team would it be and why?
Jacksonville Jaguars. I'm a Jaguars fan, so there's that. But also, the talent they have, I think it has been underutilized for the last decade, maybe even more. So I don't know if I would be the guy to turn it around, but heck, give me a shot.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. Do you have a motivational quote or some kind of mantra that you live by?
um, Not really. My dad always used to just say tip of the spear. You want to be at the front. I think that's a good one. I believe in giving. I say 110% a lot to my kids, or plus two mentality. That's an Urban Meyer thing. I was a Gators fan growing up, but I just believe in that kind of stuff. I guess a
I like.
couple.
What was this? Say the spear one more time.
Tip of the spear.
I like that. I've never heard that before. That's a good. I know. So full disclosure, I'm a Florida State fan, so obviously I know everything about Urban Meyer, and I can't stand the guy. But yes, so I know a lot of his quotes, but I've never heard the tip of the spear one's cool. Who's the most inspiring athlete to you, in your opinion, and why do you think he or she is the most inspiring athlete?
Hmm. I'll say David Ayers. You might not even know who that is. He was the emergency backup goalie.
I do
This
know
is
who that
coming
is.
off the top of my head. Who played for the Hurricanes?
Yep.
He's not really an athlete. I mean, he played as much athletics as anybody else. I think he even went higher levels of hockey than I did. Lower junior levels, and he got called up to play for the Hurricanes after both our goalies went down in Toronto, and ended up making a couple great saves and leading us to a victory. And I think that's just a super inspiring story. Uh, you never know when your name's going to get called. Talking back to the roles thing, everybody's got a role. That guy probably sat on that bench for I don't know how long, years. Never thought he was gonna, or up in the press box for years. Never thought he was gonna get called, and then his name got called and stepped down there and performed.
I think he had like another job too with the team, right? Like, because
Yeah.
I didn't know the name when you said it, but as soon as you mentioned the backup goal, I knew who you were talking about. Did you have when you were playing or currently a pregame or postgame ritual? Well, I guess pregame ritual that you had to do.
Uh, yeah. When I played hockey, my big thing was I never wore socks on game day. I don't know how I started that. I think an older kid in the locker room was doing it or something, and I just thought it was cool. And that laid over into football. I hated wearing socks. Junior year, our coach made us wear socks, like all the same kinds of socks, and I hated it. It's just weird, but I hated it, and so I tried to avoid them when I was playing. For some reason, I don't know. I guess I just liked the way it felt. Maybe I had better grasp. I don't know why I did it, but that was the thing I did.
So you being a hockey fan, I'm going to ask you this question. So I put this on Facebook yesterday. So Paul Maurice made a comment after beating the Hurricanes about how he doesn't, because there was this big back and forth between him and Rod Brendamore with the shaking the hand thing. And Paul
Mhm.
Maurice went out there and said that he doesn't believe that coaches should shake the hands of other coaches or players on the thing. He thinks it should be only a player thing. So I don't know. I haven't really digested this enough to really see where I stand on this, but like, where do you stand on that? Is this like, do you think should be like players only walk? Because his idea behind it, I'll give you the back. His is they're the ones who played the game. These players have no concept of who you are or barely who you are, and then let alone the rest of your coaches, So like that's his theory behind that is it should be only the players shaking the player's hand because they don't want to shake another suit's hand as they're walking by.
First off, I don't really like Paul Maurice. I'll say that much. I got some personal reasons there. Me and his son grew up playing hockey in Raleigh around the same time, so I have a personal relationship with him. Loosely personal relationship with him, I'll say that. But I think it was I think it's sportsmanship. Like if we're not, especially in middle school or high school, I think if the coach is not going to shake the other team's hand, then why are the players going to shake the other team's hand? And the Gaston County athletic is all about, and I think every county should be like this, all about sportsmanship at the end of the day. Not everybody's going to go play in the NFL. Not everybody's going to go be a NBA or D1 athlete, and at the end of the day, it's just about playing a game. For him, I think he was on something personal, just knowing what I do know about him. I mean, he also shook the two teams he played in the 2 rounds before that, and every other lineup I'd seen, he shook their hand. So I think it was something personal between him and Rod Brindamore.
Yeah, the whole thing was weird anyway, because you saw the interaction. I mean, I don't know if you saw it or not, but like there was a whole interaction between the two of them, and then obviously he was asked about it in the press conference, and I don't know. I have this whole weird thing about like changing things. Like I don't think I'm not a big fan of I'm a big believer, like what you said earlier. You mentioned your dad's generation. Like you go to school, you work hard because that's what you're supposed to do, right? Like that's the bare minimum. So like I have that kind of theory with like a lot of things that's like that's how sports are. Like that's how this is. Now I don't want to take that out of context. Like I think there's some things that need to be changed. That's not what I mean. But like to me, exactly everything that you just said about sportsmanship is the reason why you shake people's hands. And so like I think if you start with removing the coaches, the next thing is all of a sudden the players aren't going to be shaking hands.
Yeah.
I think that's what happens next. What's your last one for you, and then I'll get you out of here. What's your goal now for you going down the road? Like what do you want to see happen? Like obviously you had dreams like every kid does to play sports professionally. It doesn't work out. You become a teacher. You have the football thing going on, but what's your goal now?
The next step I think would be being an athletic director down the road. Maybe at WC Friday, maybe somewhere else. That's really where I see myself aligning. Hopefully win a couple middle school Gaston County championships before that though.